covering in our discussion today. We have 4 speakers in addition to myself. My name is Peter Brimble. I'm the Senior Technical Advisor of a UK aid project based in Myanmar. I have been living in Yangon for about 5 years now, and I must say the issues of financial development, microfinance, impact investing in Myanmar is kind of interesting, and I think it reflects a picture which is not the same as it is in Japan or Korea or other more developed Singapore, and I think it's more like other developing countries in Southeast Asia like Laos, Cambodia, I would add Thailand, perhaps even Vietnam. So I will try to bring a little bit of the perspective from Myanmar into the discussion. We have Juneja, who is from India, and he has had, I think, 55 years of experience, is that right? More than 3 decades of experience working in related issues to entrepreneurship. We have James Mendoza, who's with a group called Maroon Studios, and the thing I like about his CV, at least, is that they aim to help to create a bridge between, I guess, a new startup or a new entrepreneur and the kind of expansion possibilities of funding and technology and so on. So I think this is something very interesting. Over here we have Mr. Bonsai, otherwise called Masato Wada, and he has probably the most cool website I've ever visited about his startups and his work in agro-related business and handicrafts in Japan. So he'll bring some perspectives of that. And then Stephanie Lau is the person who saves me from being on a mantle, I guess. But her background is really interesting, and she blends together finance from working with Bloomberg in a day job, and then a non-for-profit which is aiming at developing for millennials that I guess I don't qualify for anymore for quite a long time, to work on issues relating to gender involvement in various entrepreneurship-related issues, and she'll talk more about that. I just wanted to say we have a kind of a sad but acute story that we used to have a candidate, a panelist called David Darmawan from Indonesia, who was going to get the plane last night, and somehow his 6-year-old daughter had seen the news of the Lion Airlines crash a couple of days back, and there was a story about a father who passed away, and she just wouldn't stop crying. And so David, I guess, put his family sort of first and is not able to be here today. But his background is incredibly interesting as well in impact investing and so on in Indonesia. And my feeling is I think it's really cute and touching that he made that decision for his daughter. But anyway, he sends his sincere apologies that he couldn't make it here today. So as we push forward, we have a task to look at basically microfinance and the relationship between microfinance and micro-entrepreneurship growth across Asia. And I guess as I just put some introductory comments, from working in the development field like I have, there's no question that microfinance is generally seen as a pretty important development tool to promote financial inclusion and to alleviate poverty. But it evolves in time. It works a lot in agriculture and agribusiness, and it often aims at providing small amounts of money to lots of poor people. In a country such as Myanmar, microfinance is not a tool for micro-entrepreneurship yet, at all, because the regulations don't allow lending more than, at the moment it's about $8,000 maximum, and you can't take collateral, not allowed to take collateral. So it's most unusual for microfinance in Myanmar to fund entrepreneurship. In Cambodia, on the other hand, microfinance has funded a lot of entrepreneurship because the regulation of the industry increased to allow microfinance to take deposits and so on, and so they start lending to small enterprises much more. In many countries like Myanmar, like Cambodia, MFIs are switching into being banks, and at least 3 or 4 of the new banks in Cambodia are former microfinance institutions. So as microfinance develops, I think we see microfinance increasingly providing funding to entrepreneurship. And I'd be interested to learn whether it's been the case in the countries that you've worked in, that this transition of microfinance to be larger, to be able to take loans, to collateral, to be able to develop projects more with SMEs than just individual groups or poor groups. In Myanmar, the whole role of fintech we will talk about, but microfinance is playing a pretty important role in fintech as well, using new technologies to reach out, becoming more inclusive and supporting inclusive business. We were in a panel discussion yesterday on impact investing. And I guess my feeling on that panel broadly is that we didn't talk too much about the role of the financial sector, like microfinance, small banks, or whatever else, in impact investing. And I think that's very critical in many countries, the poorer countries in particular around Asia. And lastly, microfinance has definitely played a key role in spreading finance into more remote locations. So like in Myanmar where I live, steadily microfinance is working out into the conflict-affected areas, into poorer rural areas, and it's playing a key role in providing finance there. So our panelist really is trying to look at 3 or 4 key issues. So on the first one, I would like just to ask Stephanie to kick off on the issue of how effective is microfinance in reducing poverty? And we can talk now about different countries, different areas, and also the importance of the access that microfinance offers to female entrepreneurs, or just women in the rural areas. So maybe introduce a bit more about yourself, Stephanie, and anything more you'd like to say, and then we'll go around the table, Wada, and then the other 2 colleagues.
Sure. So I guess I would begin with introducing a bit about myself. So coming here representing the Board of Advisors for Future City Summit. And my role at the Future City Summit involves with building international partnerships across Southeast Asia and Africa, and also establish a venture investment units that we are currently working on. And in regards to Future City Summit, is actually a millennial-led international development organizations. And we aim to propel economic and social prosperity with through public-private partnerships. So the summit itself hosts our General Assembly in Hong Kong and China every year, and we also host seasonal programs in other parts of Asia. So for example, in the upcoming January, we will work with the government in Bali to explore the future of eco-friendly tourism and sustainability lifestyle in Indonesia. And in addition to my role at the Future City Summit, I've also founded the Women in Tech community in Hong Kong, serving as the regional lead for She Loves Tech in Southern China. So She Loves Tech is one of the largest female technology entrepreneurship competitions in the world, as well as being a global shaper under the World Economic Forum. So being the only female speaker in the panel, I would like to bring in an angle of how microfinance can help empower women and gender equality, and in that sense to reduce poverty. So to begin with, like, why would microfinance wanted to target women and female as a sector? Just wanted to perhaps like look into the general pictures. Nowadays in the world, there are over 70% of the poorest populations being females. And traditionally, females have been having issues in accessing credit and capitals because a lot of the commercial banks would focus on formal business, whereby in the emerging areas, women are often engaged in informal business. And in regards to microfinance, there are actually over 85% of clients being females. So microfinance is actually microfinance actually come in and fill in the gap that female has not been able to access formal capital. And in fact, in the world of microfinance, not all clients and beneficiaries are the same because they do not behave the same. There are multiple studies and statistics, but some of the more significant ones would be that there are studies analyzing the behaviors of male and female when they receive grants and loans from the microfinance institutions. And the children of the women microfinance borrowers actually receive more benefit as opposed to the male beneficiaries. Because the reason being that females tend to invest the capital that they receive from the microfinance institutions back into the household. So some of the quite significant studies involve that out of all of the female clients, over 50% of the female clients would invest more than 75% of their income back to their household, versus only 2% in the male participants. And so when they invest the money back to their household, what would they actually do? So some of the studies actually would show that the incomes generated from these micro enterprises are actually first invested into the children's educations, and especially benefiting girls, because them, like females being the beneficiaries, they understand the importance of not going into that vicious cycle of not receiving enough educations. So they would invest back to their children, especially their daughters. And and other than like just going into educations, the household of microfinance beneficiaries in general would have better access to healthcare as well as nutrition, as opposed to male participants. So just here, like the point I wanted to bring out is that while we focus on on a topic of how microfinance can help reduce poverty, there's an angle on like why we should target female as participants, and the behavioral difference of like female receiving the loans versus males, and how they're going to make use of the capitals.
Good morning, my name is Masato, and I'm a founder of J Plus platform. And also I'm a visiting associate professor in Globis University, which is the largest MBA school in Japan. And talking about microfinance, in Japan doesn't have an example of it still. I have only public assistance. It's a finance for cost of living. So it's different of microfinance. But today, so I cannot share a good example of my country, but today I'm planning start new business, which is inspired by a microfinance. So I will show you that plan, and hopefully I want to give some advice of you. And firstly, I'm doing introduce about me. I'm exporting bonsai or garden tree to mainly to China or Vietnam or Southeast Asian country. And the tree required more than 100 years to make, and never complete. And the developers in China, they can build a new hotel. For example, maybe they can build a building in one year, but they cannot make trees because it takes more than 100 years. So they have to buy it from Japan. So that's my business. But how can I have so many stocks of that kind of old trees? Because there are three reasons. The first is that Japan is decreasing a population now, so we have a vacant home in the countryside. And the second one is the urbanization, the people now living in the center of the city. And the third one is the westernization of the lifestyle. So normally Japanese people don't need that kind of tree anymore. So we can buy it in a rural area. So that's why I have to make a network in the rural area of Japan. And at the same time, I saw the situation of the decreasing population in the rural area and lack of laborers. So I decided to do a business for providing foreign laborers to Japanese rural area. But at the same time, we are facing this difficulty of a rural area. We also find the other fact that there are so many people who want to work in Japan, in the world. So I decided to make a new company that provides foreign labor to rural Japanese countries, and which name is Asia Network. That's my new company. However, foreign labor has another problem, another situation, and the problem is working poor. Their salary is lowest, like 1,100 US dollar per month. So it's the lowest. Normally, it's a Japanese minimum salary. So they can spend only 205 US dollars per month. So that's a problem. And if they live with spending just $250 per month, and that means they cannot do anything. So I want to help their life in Japan. So I want to start up a business which is inspired by microfinance, and that helps them to earn new income. And the system is we launch a new brand of high quality Japanese products, and we sell it to them at wholesale price, and they will sell it to their own countries, and they can earn another income. Because due to a visa problem, they cannot work multiple jobs, so they have to make a business. So maybe I think this idea is based on microfinance, because we gave some asset to them, and they make a business. So that's what I want to do. Thank you.
Okay, so this is sort of like some entrepreneurial issues. I think maybe some bridges could be built in that model. So James, maybe just two more quick introduction of you and a bit on the sort of impact of microfinance in Philippines as you see it, in poverty alleviation, and then India. Then we'll get on to some of the bridge building issues, which is what we do for a living.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is James Mendoza. Just a brief background on what I do. So I lead a company called Maroon Studios. So we are an IT company. So I would just like to share a little bit on how we started, because I think it's a bit relevant on micro-entrepreneurship in general. So we started the company 5 years ago. So we're still a startup, and we're all nerds. So all of my co-founders are all engineers. So we had no idea at the start on how to finance ourselves. The reason why we started the company is because we were a bit fed up with working with our previous employers, mainly because we do not readily see the output of the technologies that we create. So we used to work for a lot of multinationals before, but coming from a developing country, we see a lot of the inefficiencies. There's a lot of traffic, inefficient IT systems, corruption in government. So we were really fed up. But we thought that if nobody's gonna fix it, might as well do it ourselves. So that's the main reason why we started the company. But again, as I said, we had no idea on what we're doing financially. So it was a struggle 5 years ago for us. So eventually, we were able to get a little bit off the ground. And now we serve 3 key sectors of the industry: healthcare, the public sector, and SMEs. We are serving those industries mainly because we really see the impact that it provides to the country in terms of just being more efficient. Again, from the background of our country, we really need a lot of education with regard to the use of digital technologies. Not really so much on the rocket science type ones, just the basic ones, because we learned quickly that for most enterprises, especially micro enterprises, a little bit of infusion of technology goes a long way. And so that's what we've been doing. So aside from providing these services to the sectors that I've mentioned, we've also tried to develop our own intellectual property that still is well aligned with micro-entrepreneurship. So the first foray of that is a product called Health Blocks. So in the Philippines, we're 110 million people. So one of the big problems that faces us is healthcare, mainly access to the right healthcare services and even medicines. So the platform basically serves, again, micro enterprises, small clinics, private practice doctors, and we enable them to not only manage the health records of their patients, but also to manage their financials. We quickly realized that for most of these micro enterprises, it's really mismanaged. Not only on the compliance side, but more so on, okay, am I even profitable? Am I even earning something out of this? So that's a big struggle for most of the physicians that we work with. The second one is also linked to finance, mainly on loan origination and loan fulfillment. Again, for our country, 70+% of adults still is unbanked or underbanked. So there's not much credit scoring happening. So what we are enabling our customers, which are either minimum age earners or, again, micro enterprises, we give them a mobile application that they can log their loan applications to, inclusive of KYC procedures and submission of documents. And we funnel those applications to our partner financial institutions. So the platform is called Simplify, or Simplifying Financial Inclusion. What we've realized, again, through the platform is that a lot of micro enterprises and minimum wage earners, they're really intimidated by the sheer number of requirements in submitting their loan applications and whatnot. But at the end of the day, that's something that they need. For the financial institutions, they really need to vet the validity of those people and ensuring that they can get to pay. But for those that are intimidated, we felt that they were really missing out on a lot of financing opportunities. So that's what we try to do for them. So I hope that with the background that I have, I'd be able to provide some insights on the discussion this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, James. That's a really good introduction. Juneja, from your more than 3 decades of experience.
Good morning to you all. And I hope you're all with me here. Yeah. You will be surprised to know there are more than 20 million people in India who are below the poverty line. We had about 30%, now it's about 20%, 25 million people are there below the poverty line. And it has been established that microfinancing, entrepreneurship, and poverty alleviation have a strong relationship. And it has come through what you call the self-help groups. Self-help groups. And I think I will be not fair if I don't mention the name of Mahatma Gandhi, with whom we are all familiar. In 1918, about exactly 100 years ago, he set up what you call the Textile Workers Association, Union, in the city of textile called Ahmedabad. And it was a very strong union. But in 1972, one Ila Bhayan they call her popularly, she was a very strong activist social worker. She found a lot of women in the area, in that Ahmedabad area, who are below the poverty line, and they have very difficulty in organizing financing or doing some small businesses, micro enterprises, roadside vendors, that kind of stuff. So what she organized, a organization called SEWA, SCWA, Self-Employed Women Association. Self-Employed Women Association. And through that, she made all the people in the area, the women particularly, 91% are women, to put their savings together, whatever they have, little bit, and lend to the women who didn't have the money. then get it back. Charge a small rate of interest, and all the people who deposit the money, all the women, they will also get some interest payback with that. So I think that gave the movement what you call these self-help groups. You heard about Muhammad Yunus in Bangladesh, who started. On the similar lines, now you'll be surprised if I tell you there are about 2.3 million self-help groups in India now. 2.3 million self-help groups in India. And their membership is about 35 million people. But seeing the success of this, in 1996, the government of India came what you call the world's largest microfinancing institution called a program, National Rural Livelihood Program. And it is a very strong program which has been instituted, and we are close to 8.5 million self-help groups in this particular group, employing about 5 million people in this area. They have been 50 million people are involved in this particular area. So I think then we have another very strong, since you are talking microfinancing, we are talking about what we call NABARD, National Bank for Rural Development. NABARD gave the pillar for giving financing to microfinancing to these self-help groups, to the groups they could get the money. And ultimately, after seeing the success of self-help groups, in 2006, the Reserve Bank of India, the central bank of India, gave a mandate. Okay, the various banks can give money, the commercial banks, to the self-help groups. Self-help group to be treated as entities, because you have to, and they can give the money without collateral security, because collateral security is the biggest problem, you know that. I think that way, the total people from the self-help groups, they graduated what you call above the poverty line. So now we have a reduction from, not because of this alone, but larger contribution, and almost we have gone down to 20%, as I told you. I think quickly I tell you about the self-help group, the summary what they have been study have done very quickly. Number one, that there is strong relationship between poverty alleviation and self-help groups. Number two, in India there are 29 state file union territories. All those states who have a strong self-help groups, they have least number of people under the poverty line. So therefore, the graduation with self-help groups from below poverty line to above poverty line has tremendous impact on this. And third finding is there that the self-help groups, the model has played a very strong role in bringing people above the poverty line. So this is studies have shown and established. So I thought with this, the other thing to talk to, but I thought in quickly introduce the subject, the self-help group, their success, and bringing the people from below the poverty line to the above poverty line. Thank you.
Okay, I think very interesting. So we sort of have a lot of information on how microfinance, or maybe finance generally, can alleviate poverty, but there seems to be still a kind of a gap in understanding how microfinance and or other kinds of finance link to build up entrepreneurship and enable companies to get into the sort of more formal economy. Interestingly enough, in Myanmar, a story I've just recently had on a project processing mangoes in Shan State, where there was a farmers group of about 22 farmers who got together, maybe a self-help group, I suppose. Those farmers formed a company, a commercial company, and a rather innovative bank called Ayawadi Farmers Bank came in and lent them $250,000 to build a processing plant. The bank called this an SME loan, $250,000, actually not so small. But the interesting question that we found there was that the bank lent to that farmers group with, say, 15% interest. A microfinance would have lent to that farmers group at 30% interest. Massive difference, and I think the whole issue of banks and microfinance coming together and bringing more effective finance and cheaper finance to SMEs is quite important. And I guess that part of the transition of MFIs, of microfinance, into more like commercial banks, as has happened in Cambodia, I think can raise the bar. And I think that's one crucial shift to create a bridge into finance, into a more modern economy. And James, I mean, I look at Simplify, and I see in Myanmar things like that. How do you make it easier for a small business to get a bank account, to do know your client type of stuff? That's a key part of a bridge, and I guess if you could talk a bit more about that.
Okay. So a bit more on Simplify. So the concept basically started for us, I think, 2 years ago, and mainly it was out of what we thought then was a huge shift in the mindset, at least in the Filipinos, that we are becoming more mobile first, and so that's the first observation that we got. We're becoming more mobile first, especially for the lower brackets of the economy. And I think that's the same observation as with the other developing countries, that we're skipping the personal computer, the laptop, and we're moving towards everything on the mobile. So that was our first observation. Number two is that when we also check, there's a huge, as I said earlier, gap between the understanding for most minimum wage earners and micro businesses in terms of what they need to provide or be at a level to be able to acquire financial instruments such as business loans, personal loans, those types of things. And what we've observed is that since there's a gap with that, most of these people or organizations, they tend to lean towards unstructured types of institutions to secure their loans, basically loan sharks. And it's very disheartening because, as Peter said, the interest rates are really off the charts. And instead of really helping them, it cripples the business all the more. For example, we've worked with farmers in the northern part of the Philippines. Just for some context, for farmers in the Philippines, most of the time, they do not own the lands that they work on. So they just basically manage the lands for the actual owners, and they get a little bit of earnings from that. Unfortunately, our country is very much typhoon prone. So most of the time, when a huge typhoon hits, the rice or the vegetables that were initially planted gets destroyed. And because they don't have really money themselves, but they still need to plant because they need to earn, they go to this informal types of institutions for loans. And guess what? With the huge interest rate, at the end of the year, instead of earning anything, they just break even or operate at a loss. Then come next year, same cycle continues. So at the end of like 5-10 years, they're like a couple of $1,000s into debt, and for minimum wage earners, that's a huge amount of money. So we saw that gap, and what we wanted to do was to bridge that gap, not only for the ones that taking loans, but more so on the institutions themselves. So we are now working with 2 institutions. One is a medium-sized bank in the Philippines, and also an investment bank in the Philippines. When we started our conversations with them, and we pitched the idea of giving this types of loans to this particular segment, we got 2 reactions. Number one, so you mean to say they won't go to the office anymore and they'll just course it through the app? That's not secure. So that's the first reaction that we got. The second reaction that we got was, how are you going to manage the risks for these types of investors? The way they're managing it right now is through the interest rates, not so much after that. So for the first part of the question, which is with regard to security, we tried to at least give them some sense of relief that, number one, in other parts of the world, this is actually being done. probably in different types of sectors, but definitely still being done. And that, you know, the infrastructure really is already there, the technical infrastructure. It's just a matter of educating the users, both sides, the loan origination part and the ones that actually give the money, that the system can be trusted. On the second part, wherein securing the enterprises or the minimum wage earners, what we actually did was helping them through education. We found out that there's a lot of these micro businesses, minimum wage earners, that they don't have a clue about finance at all. So a little bit of education, 1 to 3 hours of like half a day seminar for them with snack really helped a lot, especially for them understanding that, okay, if I source my merchandise for like $1, I can't sell them for like $1.20 because I don't make money. So those bits and pieces, when we did that for them, it minimized the risk from them defaulting from the loans. So the partner banks are happy, our micro business partners are happy. So it's a little bit of like an ecosystem that we built. So
yeah. Really neat idea of how you can use fintech or new technologies to bridge the gap. But the lesson I get from you is that it's not just fintech that you need. You need quite a lot more. And interestingly enough, in Myanmar, we were supporting the development of an app for farmers to access inputs and so on, and also to access prices and other related information. And the biggest challenge that they faced was that if you have a mobile phone, especially a smartphone, and you're a farmer in the field with your hands all muddy, you don't want to use your smartphone. So they had a problem that he'd only use it when he went home at night. That kind of challenge is really critical, though, to address. Stephanie, I mean, on the side of how new financial technologies can build a bridge relating to some of the 85% of microfinance recipients that get loans, and you mentioned that women tend to use the loans more sensibly, but still many of them are just borrowing for household use or something like that. How about the next step to build a bridge?
Sure. So I guess I would just first wanted to highlight some of the challenges that the female beneficiaries are facing. So yes, over 55% of the recipients of microfinance are females, but then there are actually a lot of limitations in how they can make use of the capital because of the social status that they're facing in the respective areas. So often the case, they have little or no control over the capital that they receive, and because of that, typing on the same line, there is often the case that their husbands or the male members of their family would make the decisions on how they can make use of the loans. And this is part of the reasons of the lower social status that they're facing in their respective regions, but also the differences in terms of the literacy, the property rights, as well as the attitudes towards females. So this is the problem that they're facing, even though they are the major recipients of microfinance services. So in regards to like how we can improve the situations rather than just looking into technologies, there are some root causes that we need to solve. So first of all, first and foremost, there's a very urgent need to improve female social status and the community awareness in these respective regions. And there could be like, ways that we can think of how to deal with the situations could be incorporating campaigns or social movements that are directed to females to develop a sense of positive attitudes to female entrepreneurs or female, or in general, female workers in these areas. And some of the examples that I wanted to share actually happens in the developed world. So it's not so much in the developing world, but then it's still targeting females in general. So back in Hong Kong, I co-founded a community of women in tech. And so although like Hong Kong is not traditionally a microfinance kind of focus areas, but then the community itself actually helps females that have an interest in technologies. So those could be entrepreneurs themselves, or those could be like bankers, like working moms, students, etc., to help them develop the essential skills that to stay relevant in the technology-driven world. And we are also very supportive communities in the sense that we would help each other to develop skill sets, refer like job opportunities, speakership opportunities, or in general like supporting each other to grow our own expertise as well as the business. And there's another example that I want to share is actually an initiative started by a friend of mine in Japan. And she's experimenting that with the University of Tokyo right now. And so there's so the program names is in Japanese, but the direct translation is like 01 female. So what they do is that they would recruit university students from the institutes that they partner with, and then they would build these boot camps whereby they help them to validate business ideas, help them to accelerate the ideas, as well as to bootstrap the ideas into use cases and businesses. And the idea is that even though Japan is a relatively wealthy country, in terms of social status, females they still tend to have a very traditional mindset that even though like they graduated from good universities or have a very prominent education background, they would tend to follow that traditional path of perhaps work for a few years or tend to be not too ambitious in terms of the career path. So this is not to really ask them to entirely change the mindset, but then to educate them that there could be an additional choice in their career path. So they could also be an entrepreneur themselves. It's not like it's not like there's only one choice or path that they have to follow. So these cases can actually be incorporated into the developing worlds as well. So in regards to like other than like just looking into technology itself, there are like some root causes or issues that we have to solve in regards to social status, but also raising the literacy and savviness of females in regards to how they can manage how they can manage their finances, how they can develop business ideas, and as well as to stay relevant in regards to technologies. So, but then there's use cases of technology as well. So. Axion, which is a nonprofit organization and as well as a pioneer in financial inclusions. So Axion recognized the importance of having financial literacy in their female clients. So what they do is that the team actually built toolkits and training programs that could be delivered online and in a mobile way. And so in the case of them, they actually help low-income individuals in India to learn about the tools that they need to grow financially, as well as how they can avoid going into debt again after receiving the loans. So building up that financial literacy and education is actually very important, and that echoes with what James mentioned just now as well, as in rather than just looking into the loan structures or looking into how we can deliver the mechanism, we actually have to think about like instead on top of just providing the loans, how we can bundle that with the education services as well.
Okay, interesting then. So the perspective a bit the same, the need for education, financial literacy, and related issues quite critical. So, Juanita, on the fintech or reaching out, I mean, I think about the self-help groups. I just wonder how those self-help groups can grow or expand or move into something beyond, just reaching out of poverty. Any thoughts on that kind of a bridge?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I talked about poverty alleviation. Another aspect which I like to, related to what your subject you talk about, there are 15.5% people unemployed in India. So I think when I was chairman of a public sector company called the National Small Industries Corporation, we brought what you call the motivational intensive campaigns. Under the motivational campaign, we encourage entrepreneurship and finance them. Those young people, boys and men and women, those who wanted to set up their own enterprises. And you'll be happy, Mr. Chairman, that it has tremendously good results. I was chairman for 14 years of that company. Today in India, close to 110 million, 66 million, we have enterprises, micro, small, medium enterprises. 97% of them are only micro enterprises. They have come through, mostly the manufacturing and services sector. And when we encouraged, you talked about technology, we also encouraged them to pick up new technologies while going to the manufacturing or support sector. So I think we had very good, tremendous results, and they're employing about something like 110 million people. So I think it has been a very good route for promoting micro enterprise, small enterprise, and generating self-employment opportunities for the young people. So I think
what did it do? How did you support? How did you provide support?
First, one is the motivational intensive campaign, entrepreneurship development, and financing. This was a composite, what you call the integrated approach. It has given tremendously good results. So I think this has been a very, very successful route.
Okay.
So now, in the recent past, we have been encouraging what you call the innovations. Since you talk about technology, innovation, we find a lot of micro enterprises, small enterprises, they bring about innovation. Bring about some changes. You know, there's one Oslo definition. Oslo. There's a definition about a thing that is on innovation, whether you bring about changes in the products, and the changes in the process of manufacturing, or in the marketing, or in the, what you call the organization structure. This is the Oslo definition, which covers 4 components. Under that, we figured out that those small and micro enterprises who brought about some innovation in the products, services, and process of manufacturing or marketing techniques, they could grow faster. And we find only those companies who are bringing innovation in this competition age, because not economies are all opening up. In this competition, all those companies who are innovative, they are growing faster. Those who do not bring any changes or innovative, they are slowly going down. This is a very strong finding with us. So apart from encouraging new technologies, we want the micro, small enterprises to be also innovative. That is a very strong thing. So these are the 3 things I talked about: poverty alleviation, motivation intensive campaigns, and innovation. These are the 3 things I have covered. And I have a small paper. There are a few copies available. Those who are interested, they can get a copy from me also.
Okay, thanks very much, Juneja. Okay, before we open for Q&A, so please think of some issues you may want to elaborate further on. Masato, any reflections on your challenges about facing raising finance, even the migration project, which sounds kind of interesting.
Yeah.
They all have finance problem, I'm sure.
And I think the biggest impact of fintech is reducing the cost of microfinance, because normally that interest of microfinance is around 20% or more than of that. Because normally in Japan our interest is 1% per year. So maybe if the interest is 20%, it doesn't work, it doesn't pay. But microfinance can reduce the cost, and for example, Tala online lending, it's realized 11% of interest. So I think if that kind of in fintech we can use, maybe we can reduce the interest. So maybe we can do it in Japan also.
Yeah, my name is Shima. I have been working in the investment industry, but before that I was working with the World Bank, and I did some study in the microfinance area as well. And I think the issue of microfinance is the same everywhere. First of all, I think the scarcity of the debt capital is one of the big issues, and the underdevelopment of the banking system. In most Asian countries, there are tremendously rich conglomerates. But the issue is they do not put their deposit in the banks. They put their deposit in Singapore or in Hong Kong. And if microfinance, if managed properly, they could earn 30% interest rate. And if they could invest their own earnings back in their local currency, and then if the banks is more willing to provide that loan for the local market, it is very important point for the local market to take off from the export-driven economy to the domestic demand-led economy. But unfortunately, the government or the leaders in these countries are not very much focused on that sector, and they jump into depend too much on the international support for that purpose. That's one. Secondly, the business side. By nature, micro businesses are very small, and there's no S&P or Moody's to rate the credibility of these businesses. No one's going to pay the cost to study how credible each businesses are. So it is important for the micro businesses to stand up and say, hey, I'm okay, I can do this work. And if you give credit to me, I'm going to pay back. So I think the fintech has a tremendous potential for these smaller ones to stand out and say how good they are. That's number two on the business side. And I think because of the lack of the banking system, the most critical issue is people now has access to information. Even Myanmar, more than 90% of the population are using Facebook. But then, why there's no internet-based services? Because there's no settlement system. And the banks, the deposit of Myanmar vis-a-vis their GDP is maybe around 5% of GDP, very small saving ratio. They do not save. So, and bank does not, and maybe less than 10% of the population has bank accounts. So there's no settlement mechanism which can be done through the banking systems. So I think here's another area where fintech can really complement. Especially, as I mentioned, fintech can be used to identify the good entrepreneurs, one, but fintech can also be used by providing the capital through leasing or inventory financing or purchaser financing, and these are the mechanisms without using the banks to provide the flow of capital to the small businesses.
You addressed some of them to Myanmar. In fact, this Thursday, the central bank is holding a workshop on QR codes and bringing in technical assistance from Thailand and Singapore central banks to understand a bit how those two different markets went ahead with that. And I hope that will help them to trigger a decision on QR codes very quickly, which will be...
even using the QR code, well, the Chinese QR code system depends on the bank savings. I know there's small digital wallet in Myanmar, but the digital wallet is a kind of prepayment system. So you need a place to hover the money.
As a step toward developing a national payment strategy, they are taking this step, and then hopefully we'll go further. But I think the comments on other fintech mechanisms like invoice financing or factoring or just mobile money, actually, no MFI, no microfinance has yet implemented a full mobile wallet, but they are trying now. Vision Fund is implementing a project to do that. So I think those measures are moving ahead. James, any comments from, sounds very familiar, I'm sure.
Yes, actually I would like to comment on that because you're right about, I think that across all developing countries, the problems are very much the same, and that it's not that the technology access per se is the problem. I think it is a more holistic problem. And I think you mentioned about the buy-in from government as well with regard to regulations. I think it's pretty much the same case as ours in the Philippines, in that the central bank in the Philippines has been very conservative, to say the least, which is something that we needed because we're really growing and whatnot. But I think we're now at a pivotal point that we might want to be more bold, so to speak, with regard to new things, quote unquote. I mean, QR codes aren't really new, so to speak, but I think it's the adoption that really is something that we need. I would like also to echo what you said about that. For most minimum wage earners and micro enterprises, digital money is a bit difficult to grasp, mainly because it's a bit quote unquote unsafe. You know, I mean, at least for you, if for your hard-earned money, I think you would really want to hold on to that and count it, as opposed to having digits and whatnot in your wallet. So it really requires a change of mindset, a change of thinking about money in general. And I think that 5-10 years down the road, it shouldn't be a problem. But I think now that we're in the awkward year, so to speak, it's really from the technical guys, it's frustrating. But I think it's also frustrating as well for the users.
Actually, I just add a small comment. In Vietnam here, we ran a project under ADB umbrella, actually, called the FinTech Challenge. And it was very interesting. The FinTech Challenge in Vietnam was funded by about 5 large Vietnamese banks and completely sponsored by the State Bank of Vietnam. And the prize for the winners of the challenge was to go in to work for one of the banks and solve a problem. In fact, that was the challenge. There were 140 applications, both from within Vietnam and outside Vietnam. And it was just fascinating. I mean, I think we had no idea it was going to come like that. But and in Cambodia, which is, you would think, nothing like that. In fact, even in Cambodia, you have, at least 20 or so fintech providers now. And I think this whole thing, and as you point out quite rightly, a chunk of those things don't depend anything on the central bank financing system or whatever. But the bank I mentioned, the Ayeyarwady Farmers Bank, is a commercial bank. But it loans 3 years, it loans at 15% to rural people without doing formal due diligence, without formal collateral. And I think they are going to succeed. I think those groups are quite a bit like if you lend to women entrepreneurs, they pay back. And I think that's something to go. But the role of fintech in supporting that, I think, is quite important. Okay. Any further questions? Yes, sir.
Actually, I just want to comment on, there's always like a couple of features that's always missing with the discussion about microfinancing, is that we can talk about technology, we can talk about business development, help them with export guidance. But at the end of the day, I'm a venture capitalist, so there's always a gap. Any new idea to come up, there's always a gap of like, you need just some money to get going. To get things launched, and then you go from there, select the better projects to expand from the World Bank or IFC financing, from policy bank financing. Again, meaning it's not a big amount, like $50,000 is like a typical number. We call it walk around money. Basically, you have the cash, you can now fund the business. And if you go to microfinancing, where you got interest rate issues, and then people hesitate. So my suggestion, just having been involved in economic development policies, is just the government has to create basically grant money. It happened in the US with a Ben Franklin program in Pennsylvania. It happens in Hong Kong now with a government grant to get it started. It took them a while to figure out the ideas. So if the government on an annual basis can take a budget out, it's basically written off money. You don't expect it to come back. But then have a really good program to just select projects to grant the $50,000 for free. You take it and you just run with it, and then you'll be surprised how much good can come out from it. Because the person who take it can now really have a freedom to just go for it. And from there, you take the idea of one step further and say, well, given the economy is so much technology driven, and the next wave of innovation will really come from the traditional business, agriculture, manufacturing, electronic production. They just have some element of technologies that become part of IoT configurations. And you see how far you can go with it, but you just need to get going money that they can just grab and use. I think it's something to think about.
Would that be like angels or?
No, it's government. It's a policy-driven approach from the government to drive innovation to get going with just grant money. There's no angel money. It's basically grant. You just give it away. Don't expect it to come back. And then it's economic
So this is what
development.
like Singapore is doing?
Yeah, a lot of more pioneering government now doing it. Finally got the message.
Yeah, okay.
I would like to comment on that. For the Philippine setting, it has been an ongoing thing, I think, for the last 5-10 years. But the funny thing is that most micro enterprises doesn't have a clue that it even exists. So I think for most governments, there are mechanisms that are in place. But I think what is lacking is the communications between the regulators, the governments, and the actual end users, and the fact that they can actually leverage these types of instruments for them. Most of the time, I think it's a matter of really educating, the micro enterprise that okay, aside from these options, you also have these things, and actually these things are actually better for you and will work for you. So I think bridging that gap is also very important. And also, I think number two is that those opportunities, those offerings by government may at times be prone to abuse as well. In countries that are developing, corruption rates are really high as well. So that is, I think, a barrier as well, because okay, this probably are opportunities for micro enterprise, but if the few that are in the government that act as the middleman for those actually acts as a blockage for the micro enterprises to actually access, and they're blocked off, and only a few get to take advantage of those.
Well, I guess something we're working on in Ghana in my organization is to provide grants to either relatively not small groups to do transformational stuff, or incubators or accelerators to help SME new startups. We go through a process, and then after that, have a mechanism to them to have good access to potential funding from angel investors up to investment funds through and portfolio internet or something. So that's certainly a part of it. But to get a country like in Denmark to put their own money up, this money is really coming from development partners, actually, like UKA, the Danish, or even the World Bank. Sometimes I see it, but not much, I think. Okay, any other questions or comments from the floor? Okay, well, let's have one more round for us all to reflect on the key issues.
Mr. Chairman, wrapping up, you already done very beautifully, but I would like to just supplement something interesting. Most of our countries, they do have what you call the vocational training programs. We were training something like 4,000 to 5,000 people a year, young people, men and women. And I introduced what you call the entrepreneurial content to the vocational training. We told them, yes, you have been trained vocationally, but instead of hunting for a job, you could set up your own enterprise and set up a small workshop. You'll be happy to know that almost 20% because mostly vocational trained people, they look for jobs. And you'll be happy to know that 20% people, the young people, they decide to set up their own workshops. They did that. And I think this has been a very interesting program. And second, quickly, I would like to add, in India has about 20,000 African students, 20,000, from All India Management Association, which is associated with ISIS. I am organizing a training program for them. They whereby when they return to home, when they own countries, they don't look for a job. They set up their own enterprises. You'll be happy to know 69% of all the people who are studying, and they said when they go back home, they would like to set up their own enterprise. Additional 20% said we take some experience, gain some experience, then we set up an enterprise, 89%. So the title of the program is Don't Hunt for the Job, Be Your Own Boss. Don't hunt for the job, be your own boss. So I thought I will, before you sum up, I will quickly add this. Thank you.
Well, that's still kind of cool. I guess African students coming to India and getting trained in entrepreneurship. I think that's a neat idea. Okay, Stephanie, from your point of view, how do you see everything wrapping up?
Sure. I guess today's in terms of my sharings, I was mainly focusing on the importance of empowering women through microfinance, because that would bring the most incremental impact. But then I agree with what Toshima-san and Peter, you like both brought up some very important points, as in there are some structural issues to be resolved in regards to the topic of microfinance, and it's not just, it's actually it has to involve both top-down and bottom-up in effort. So in the top-down levels, there has to be like government support in regards to perhaps like providing grant, like establishing a formal like settlements and banking systems. But then in the bottom-up, like what the community can do is also to establish like literacy, entrepreneurship skills, as well as to develop technologies that can provide better access and credibility in terms of the service to be delivered.
Hello, thank you for many information, all of you. Because today is for me it's entrance day, the first day for microfinance. So I would like to inform you my business, what's going on, and I want to be my business with the first example of Japanese micro entrepreneurship. Thank you.
Actually, how much is a bonsai tree?
Much.
How much does it cost?
No, it depends on the.
Okay, the cheapest one.
Cheapest one is like $1,000.
$1,000.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay. Probably as final thoughts from me. First, I mean, it's a good opportunity to sit here and share the initiatives that we've been doing, at least from the market that we're in, and it is a bit refreshing to hear the familiar experiences from everybody. That at least in the Philippines, we're not alone. So perhaps I would like to end with I think. SMEs, MSMEs are really the drivers of economy, and that we would really need a lot of effort into ensuring that the fire on those entrepreneurs isn't really extinguished, but rather further improved or further helped. And I think proper structures with government, with private sector, and with technology would really come hand in hand. For our market, I think in the next 5-10 years there will be a huge shift, and that I think the SMEs would really shine. So I do hope that we can contribute into that growth, and I'm really hopeful that the technology part of it would really be instrumental as well.
Okay, I guess in terms of my own thoughts here, something that has really affected me since I moved to Myanmar. And looking a little bit at, as you say, 80% or 90% have this phone and so on. I have many friends from Kenya or Tanzania. And when I see how far ahead those economies are in terms of mobile money and like ordering things. In Myanmar right now, there's some very wealthy women that sell clothes on Facebook. But they only take the order on Facebook. Then they send a driver over to get to deliver the product and get the money in cash, right? And what you were saying is very true. But in Myanmar now, we have specialists coming from Tanzania and Kenya working for the big telecom companies in this whole space, and it's just surprising to me. We talked earlier. I would think Philippines must be far ahead of Myanmar somehow. I don't know why. But then we talk about invoice financing, factoring. It's just starting out, actually. It's just starting out in Myanmar too. And there's this leapfrogging potential, I think, that I would never think that Myanmar could catch up or overlap. I bet you that Cambodia has more fintech than Philippines, for example. And it's just very interesting, this whole disruption in this market. You can do something so critical, so important, and have something that can really move straight back into entrepreneurship and poverty through just simple, I guess, fintech. It's not so magic and not so difficult. And your products, it looks just as similar to what companies in Myanmar are working to do: sell tickets, sell bus tickets. Okay, that's sort of a big one, right? Or other things. So I think it's really fascinating to see how entrepreneurship is moving. And you make the comment that actually in a country like Myanmar, 70% of people live in rural areas. The future is agtech, actually. And if you can take agtech and publicize that and think of the way in which technology can work with farmers and small industry, like my avocado processing plant. It's really neat. In the middle of nowhere, you have this big factory now that's built in less than 7 months, and they're going to process avocado and strawberries and all kind of things. And it's a local group, and they got empowered through a project that Dana was financing, and they got this loan from the bank, which was just, I think, really good, and I hope they can pay back, but even if they don't, doesn't affect the project. It affects the bank, but I hope the bank can keep going and engage more. So I think it's really, I'm really interested to meet with James, and also would have met with David from Indonesia, because I guess there's a lot of similarities there. And on the issue of how to involve millennials and engage with millennials more, I think would be really interesting to share some collaboration with Stephanie. And I have to start saving now for a bonsai tree, maybe. Or convince my wife to buy a bonsai tree, I'm not sure. And then Juneja, I guess India, tremendous experiences, and I think we certainly can learn a lot from that. So any other burning comments from anybody in the floor? We have actually time for about one more, if there is one. Okay, if not, thank you so much. Let me ask everyone for a round of applause for the panelists. And
give a big hand to the chairman once again.
And look forward to network.
I have a small paper. If anybody is interested, you can pick up a copy.